The sun hung low over Mercy's Bend, painting the red hills in shades of copper and rust. Dust devils danced across the barren landscape, and the skeletal arms of saguaro cacti reached toward a sky that promised no mercy. It was the kind of evening that made men reach for their whiskey and women bolt their doors. Colt Rawlins rode into this unforgiving land with nothing but the clothes on his back, a worn saddle, and a reputation that followed him like a shadow. His broad shoulders carried the weight of too many fights, and his calloused hands told stories of ranch work and harder times. The scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone spoke of a past he'd rather forget. He'd been run off from the Double Bar Ranch 3 days prior, after breaking the jaw of a foreman who thought it sport to whip a young Mexican stable boy. It wasn't the first time Colt's fists had cost him work, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But a man had to eat, and Hollow Creek Ranch was hiring, even if their reputation stank worse than a week-old carcass. The ranch sprawled across the valley like a wounded beast, its buildings weathered and mean-looking. The other hands eyed him with a suspicion reserved for newcomers, especially ones who arrived with split knuckles and no references. The foreman, a grizzled man named Hayes, looked him up and down like he was sizing up a bull for slaughter. "Can you rope?" "Yes, sir." "Shoot?" "When I have to. Keep your nose clean and your fists to yourself, and we might get along fine. Pays $2 a day. Grub included. You cause trouble, you're out on your ear." "Understood." Colt nodded. It was the same speech at every ranch, and he'd learned to keep his head down and his mouth shut, at least until someone gave him reason not to. The work at Hollow Creek was brutal. The cattle were half wild, the horses meaner than rattlesnakes, and the other hands seemed to take pleasure in making life difficult for the new man. But Colt had endured worse. He kept to himself, sleeping in the barn rather than the bunkhouse, preferring the company of horses to men who'd knife you for your boots. It was on his 4th day, while driving a wagon loaded with supplies back from town, that fate intervened. The narrow pass through Devil's Canyon was treacherous even in broad daylight, with the rocks jutting out like broken teeth and shadows that could hide a dozen men. Colt had his rifle within reach and his eyes scanning the ridgeline when he heard the shots. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, making it hard to pinpoint the source. Then he saw it. A fancy carriage tilted at a dangerous angle, one wheel hanging over the edge of the trail. 2 men on horseback were circling it like vultures, firing into the air and whooping like Comanches. Though Colt could tell from their sloppy riding they were nothing but common bandits. Inside the carriage, a woman's scream cut through the chaos. Every instinct told Colt to keep driving. This wasn't his fight. Getting involved would only bring trouble, the kind that followed a man from town to town. But then he saw her, a flash of blue dress and golden hair as she tried to escape the tilting carriage, only to be grabbed by one of the bandits. Before his better judgment could stop him, Colt had grabbed his rifle and spurred his horses forward. The wagon thundered down the narrow trail, and he fired a warning shot that sent the bandits' horses dancing. The men wheeled around, surprised by the interruption. "Let her go!" Colt shouted, his rifle trained on the nearest man. The bandit laughed, showing a mouthful of rotted teeth. "This ain't your business, cowboy? Ride on if you know what's good for you." But Colt had already made his choice. When the bandit reached for his gun, Colt's rifle spoke first. The man tumbled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. His partner, seeing the odds had changed, fired once wildly before spurring his horse up the canyon wall and disappearing into the rocks. Colt jumped from the wagon and ran to the carriage, which groaned ominously as it shifted closer to the edge. The woman was pressed against the far door, her face pale, but her green eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Give me your hand," Colt said, extending his arm through the window. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then grabbed hold. He pulled her free just as the carriage gave a final groan and tipped further. Her momentum sent them both tumbling into the dust, Colt cushioning her fall with his body. For a moment, they lay tangled together, breathing hard. She smelled of lavender and fear, and when she looked up at him, Colt felt something shift in his chest, Her face was beautiful in a refined way that spoke of good breeding and easy living, but there was steel in those green eyes. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, helping her sit up. I don't think so." Her voice was cultured but steady. She looked at the wounded bandit, who was crawling toward his horse, leaving a trail of blood. "Is he—" "He'll live," Colt said grimly, though he might think twice before trying this again. As she stood, he noticed the wedding ring on her finger, a heavy gold band with diamonds that caught the dying light. His heart sank a little, though he couldn't say why. "We need to get you to town," he said, suddenly aware of how improper this all was. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though he could see her hands trembling. "My driver, they shot him?" Colt found the man slumped over the carriage box, beyond help. He said a quick prayer and covered the body with a blanket from the wagon. The woman watched with a composure that surprised him, though he could see the shock beginning to set in. He helped her onto the wagon seat, noting how she held herself back straight, chin high, even as tears tracked through the dust on her cheeks. As they started toward town, she finally spoke again. "I'm Eden Waverly," she said. "My husband is Sheriff Matthew Waverly." The words hit Colt like a bucket of cold water. Of course, he'd just rescued the sheriff's wife, in a town like Mercy's Bend. That would either make him a hero or a target. Given his luck, he figured it would be the latter. The ride to town was tense. Eden sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white every few minutes. She'd glance back, as if expecting the bandits to return. "They won't follow," Colt assured her, "not with one of them bleeding and the law waiting in town." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt exposed under her gaze. "You risked your life for a stranger." "Why?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Didn't seem right, leaving a lady in trouble." "Most men would have." "I'm not most men." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, I don't believe you are. Mr. Rollins, Colt Rollins." As they entered Mercy's Bend, people began to gather, drawn by the sight of the sheriff's wife on a supply wagon with a rough-looking stranger. Whispers followed them down Main Street like tumbleweeds. Sheriff Waverly emerged from his office before they'd even stopped. He was a tall man, lean and hard as a fence post, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes like chips of ice. He had 20 years on his wife, easy, and wore his authority like a well-oiled gun. "Eden." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands possessive on her waist. "What happened?" As she told the story, Waverly's expression grew darker. His gaze flicked to Colt, measuring and dismissive in the same look. "You're the new hand at Hollow Creek," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. You'll need to come by tomorrow and give a full statement." He turned away, already dismissing Colt from his mind. "Come, Eden, let's get you home." But Eden pulled free for a moment, turning back to Colt. "Thank you," she said simply. But her eyes said more. They spoke of gratitude, yes, but also something else. A recognition, perhaps, of one lost soul seeing another. Then Waverly's hand was on her elbow, guiding her away, and Colt was left standing in the street with the whole town watching. He could feel their judgment, their suspicion. A drifter who'd put his hands on the sheriff's wife, even to save her. In a town like this, that was a dangerous thing to be. As he drove the wagon back to Hollow Creek, the moon rising behind the canyon walls like a silver coin, Colt tried to push the image of Eden Waverly from his mind. Her green eyes, the way she'd felt in his arms for that brief moment, the steel beneath her refined exterior. He'd come to Mercy's Bend to disappear, to work and move on like always. But as the coyotes howled in the distance and the stars emerged in the vast western sky, Colt had the sinking feeling that Eden Waverly would haunt him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The other hands were waiting when he returned, full of questions and sly insinuations. Hayes just grunted and told him to unload the wagon. But as Colt worked, he kept thinking about those green eyes and the way she'd said his name. like it was something worth remembering. That night, lying in the hay with his rifle close at hand, Colt stared at the rafters and wondered if saving Eden Waverly would turn out to be the best thing he'd ever done, or the worst. In a land where the line between right and wrong was as shifting as the desert sand, only time would tell. The wind howled through the gaps in the barn walls, bringing with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere in town, Eden Waverly was lying in a fine bed next to her sheriff husband, but Colt would bet his last dollar she was staring at the ceiling too, remembering the moment when a stranger had risked everything to pull her from danger. He closed his eyes, but sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of green eyes and the smell of lavender mixed with gun smoke. The Waverly house stood at the end of Maple Street like a monument to respectability, white-painted and proper, with lace curtains in every window, and a garden that struggled against the desert climate. Eden moved through its rooms like a ghost, her footsteps echoing on polished floors that felt cold even in the heat of day. She'd been Matthew Waverly's wife for 3 years now, though it felt like 30. The house was a prison of propriety, each room a reminder of the life she'd been forced into. Her father, Reverend Josiah Hart, had arranged the marriage when whispers about Eden's friendship with a traveling painter had grown too loud. Better to be a sheriff's wife than a fallen woman. He'd said, better to have respect than love. Eden stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun paint the distant hills the color of blood. It had been 2 days since the attack, since Colt Rollins had pulled her from that tilting carriage. She could still feel the strength of his arms, the solid warmth of his body when they'd fallen together in the dust. It was the most alive she'd felt in years. "You're up early again." Matthew's voice from the doorway made her spine stiffen. "I couldn't sleep." She didn't turn around. These days, she rarely looked at him directly. "Still shaken from the incident?" He moved into the room, his presence filling the space like smoke. "Perhaps you should see Doc Morrison. He could give you something for your nerves." "My nerves are fine." "Are they?" His hand settled on her shoulder, possessive rather than comforting. "You've seemed distant since it happened. I hope that drifter didn't take any liberties when he helped you." The insinuation in his voice made her skin crawl. "He saved my life, Matthew. He was a perfect gentleman. Men like that are never gentlemen. Eden, they're opportunists. I've seen his type before. Violent, unreliable. Mark my words. He'll be trouble." She finally turned to face him, studying the man she'd been yoked to. At 45, Matthew Waverly was still handsome in a cold, carved way. But his righteousness was a mask for cruelty, his law and order speeches hiding a heart that knew nothing of mercy or warmth. "Will you be home for supper?" she asked, changing the subject. "Doubtful. I need to investigate yesterday's attack further, and that Rollins fellow is coming to give his statement." His pale eyes narrowed. "You'd do well to stay away from him. Eden, people talk in this town." After he left, Eden sank onto her bed, suddenly exhausted though the day had barely begun. 3 years of sleeping beside a man who touched her with the same dispassion he'd showed at checking his rifle. 3 years of dinner parties where she smiled and poured tea while dying inside. 3 years of her father's approving nods at her respectable marriage. The kitchen girl, Maria, brought her breakfast on a tray. The Mexican woman had kind eyes and gentle hands, one of the few sources of warmth in the cold house. "You need to eat, Senora," Maria said softly. "Keep up your strength." Eden forced herself to take a few bites of biscuit. "Maria, have you heard anything about the man who saved me, Colt Rollins?" Maria's eyes darted nervously. "Only what everyone says. That he's trouble, a fighter, but—" She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "My cousin works at Hollow Creek. He says Senor Rollins is different, quiet, respectful, stands up for those who can't stand for themselves." That afternoon, Eden found herself in Morrison's general store, ostensibly shopping for thread. In truth, she was restless, the house's walls closing in. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Colt Rollins entering. He stopped short when he saw her, his hat in his hands. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly, the weathered face that was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30, the dark hair that curled at his collar, the way his work clothes couldn't hide the strength in his frame. Mrs. Waverly. He nodded politely, already turning to leave. Mr. Rollins, wait. The words escaped before she could stop them. I wanted to thank you again, properly. No need, ma'am. Any man would have done the same. But any man didn't. You did. She moved closer, aware of Mrs. Morrison watching from behind the counter. My husband said you were giving your statement today. Yes, ma'am. Just finished. There was an awkward pause. Eden knew she should leave, knew that standing here talking to him was already fodder for gossip. But something held her in place. Are you settling in well at Hollow Creek? She asked. A wry smile touched his lips. Well enough. It's work. And before that, where did you come from? His expression shuddered. Here and there. I tend to move around. Running from something? The question was too bold, too personal. She saw him flinch slightly. Maybe, or maybe just haven't found a reason to stop running yet. Their eyes met and held. And Eden felt that same jolt she'd experienced in the canyon, an understanding between two people who knew what it was to be trapped, albeit in different ways. The door chimed again, and Judge Carver's wife entered, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. Eden stepped back quickly. Good day, Mr. Rollins, she said formally. Ma'am. He tipped his hat and left, but not before she caught something in his expression. Longing, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. That evening, Matthew was indeed absent for supper. Eden ate alone in the dining room, the clink of silverware against china the only sound. When Maria cleared the plates, she mentioned there would be a barn dance at the Hendersons' ranch on Saturday. You should go, Senora. Get out of this house for a while. Eden smiled sadly. Matthew doesn't approve of barn dances. Too common. He says, the sheriff will be busy Saturday. Some meeting with the railroad men in Tucson. The information hung in the air between them. Eden said nothing, but a plan began to form. Saturday arrived with a dust storm that turned the sky yellow and sent tumbleweeds racing through the streets. By evening, the wind had died, leaving the air clean and sharp. Eden told Maria she had a headache and would retire early. Instead, she slipped out the back door wearing her simplest dress and took the buggy to the Henderson ranch. The barn was alive with music and laughter, lanterns casting warm light on dancing couples. Eden stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. She didn't belong here among the ranch hands and their wives, these people who worked with their hands and spoke their minds freely. Then she saw him. Colt was leaning against a post, nursing a beer and watching the dancers with that distant expression she was beginning to recognize. He'd cleaned up, his hair slicked back and a fresh shirt replacing his work clothes. When he saw her, he straightened, surprise flickering across his features. Eden made her way through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers. Mr. Rollins. Mrs. Waverly. Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here. She smiled, feeling reckless. Would you care to dance? He looked around, clearly aware of the attention they were attracting. I don't think that's a good idea, ma'am. Please. She lowered her voice. Just one dance. I haven't danced in... I can't remember how long. Something in her expression must have reached him. He set down his beer and offered his hand. One dance. The fiddle player struck up a slow waltz, and Colt led her onto the floor. He danced better than she'd expected, moving with a natural grace despite his size. Being in his arms felt dangerously right. People are staring, he murmured. Let 'em. Your husband is in Tucson. His hand tightened slightly on her waist. This is dangerous, Mrs. Waverly. For both of us. I know. She looked up at him, seeing her own loneliness reflected in his dark eyes. Tell me something about yourself. Something true." He was quiet for a moment, guiding her through a turn. "I had a sister once, Sarah. She was 14 when a man tried to hurt her. I stopped him. Permanently." Eden's breath caught. What happened? The man was the mayor's son. Didn't matter what he tried to do. I was just a ranch hand. And he was somebody. Had to leave town that night. Haven't stopped moving since. That was 8 years ago. And Sarah? Married a good man. Has 3 kids now. Writes me when she can. Though I never stay anywhere long enough to write back proper. The music ended, but they stood frozen for a moment, still holding each other. Then reality crashed back. People were whispering openly now, and Eden saw judgment in their eyes. "I should go," she said, stepping back. "I'll walk you to your buggy." Outside, the stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky. At her buggy, Colt helped her up, his hands lingering on her waist a second too long. "You shouldn't come to places like this," he said softly. "You don't belong in my world, Mrs. Waverly." "I don't belong in mine either," she whispered back. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but just then, Tom Hayes emerged from the barn, clearly drunk. "Well, well, the sheriff's pretty wife and the new hand. This'll be a story for Monday." Colt's expression hardened. "Watch your tongue, Hayes. Or what? You'll break my jaw like you did Anderson's at the Double Bar." Hayes laughed nastily. "Oh yeah, we know all about you. Rollins. Just a matter of time before you show your true colors here too." Eden drove away quickly, but not before she saw Colt's fists clench. The evening that had felt like freedom now seemed like a terrible mistake. She'd exposed them both to scrutiny they couldn't afford, back in her cold bed. She stared at the ceiling and thought about Colt's story, a man who'd killed to protect his sister, who'd been running ever since. She understood now the weight he carried, the reason for the sadness in his eyes. And she understood, too, that she was falling for him, this rough, gentle man who'd saved her life and made her feel alive again in return. It was madness. It was impossible. It was inevitable. Outside her window, a coyote howled at the moon, and Eden pressed her hand to her heart, feeling it race with fear and anticipation. She'd crossed a line tonight, and there would be no going back. In a town like Mercy's Bend, secrets had a way of coming to light, and when they did, the reckoning would be swift and merciless. But lying there in the darkness, remembering the feel of Colt's arms around her, Eden couldn't bring herself to care. For the first time in 3 years, she'd felt like herself again. Whatever came next, that moment of dancing in a barn with a man who saw her, really saw her, was worth any price she might have to pay. The trouble started with the horses. 3 prize stallions vanished from the Garrison Ranch on a moonless Tuesday night, followed by a dozen head of cattle from the Twisted Creek spread 2 nights later. By week's end, Mercy's Bend was gripped by suspicion and fear. Sheriff Waverly called a town meeting, his voice echoing through the packed church. "These aren't random thefts," he declared from the pulpit. "This is organized rustling, and I'll bet my badge the perpetrators are hiding among us." His gaze swept the crowd, lingering on the cluster of ranch hands standing at the back. Colt felt those cold eyes pause on him, heavy with implication. "Some of you have taken on new hands recently," Waverly continued. "Men with no roots, no history we can verify. In times like these, we must ask ourselves, who can we really trust?" The seeds of doubt were planted. By the time the meeting ended, Colt could feel the shift in how people looked at him. He'd gone from hero to suspect in the span of a week. At Hollow Creek, the other hands grew distant. Conversations stopped when he approached. Someone moved his bedroll while he was out working, tossing it in the dirt outside the barn. The message was clear. He wasn't welcome anymore. It was past midnight when the attack came. Colt woke to the sound of splintering wood as 3 men burst into the barn. In the moonlight filtering through the slats, he recognized Hayes and 2 others from the ranch. "Time to move along, Drifter," Hayes growled, whiskey heavy on his breath. Colt rolled aside just as a boot stomped where his head had been. He came up fighting, years of survival instinct taking over. His fist connected with someone's jaw, sending them reeling. But 3 against 1 in the dark was poor odds. A blow to his ribs doubled him over, and another to his temple sent stars exploding across his vision. They dragged him outside, fists and boots finding their marks with vicious accuracy. Colt tasted blood, felt ribs crack. Just when he thought they might kill him, a rifle shot split the night. "That's enough!" Old Samuel, the ranch cook, stood in his nightshirt with a Winchester leveled. "You boys get on back to the bunkhouse before I decide to tell Mr. Holloway how you spend your nights." Hayes spat in the dirt near Colt's face. "This ain't over, killer. We know what you are." After they left, Samuel helped Colt to the cook shack, grumbling under his breath. "Damn fools, as if you'd be stupid enough to steal from ranches while working at one of them." "Doesn't matter," Colt said through split lips. "They need someone to blame." "Well, you're an easy target. No family here, no history they can point to." Samuel dabbed at a cut above Colt's eye. "That Waverly's got them all stirred up? Ask me. He's enjoying this a little too much." 2 nights later, a soft knock at the barn door woke Colt from an uneasy sleep. His hand went immediately to his gun. "It's me," came a whispered voice. "Eden?" He opened the door to find her cloaked in darkness, a basket in her hands and worry etched on her face. When she saw his bruises in the lamplight, she gasped. "My God, what happened?" "Nothing that hasn't happened before." He stepped back to let her in, knowing he should send her away but unable to do it. "You shouldn't be here. I heard what they did." She set the basket down and reached for his face, her fingers gentle on his bruised jaw. "This is my fault? The barn dance? People talking?" "No." He caught her hand, meaning to push it away but holding it instead. "This started before that. Men like me, we're always the first to be suspected when trouble comes." She turned his hand over, tracing the scars on his knuckles. "Let me help. I brought bandages. Salve." "Eden." Her name on his lips stopped her. "Why did you come here?" In the lamplight. Her eyes were deep as wells. "You know why." The air between them crackled with dangerous electricity. Colt knew he should step back, should protect them both from what was building. Instead, he pulled her closer. "This is madness," he whispered. "I know. Your husband doesn't see me, has never seen me, not the way you do." She rose on her toes, and their lips met in a kiss that was part desperation, part inevitability. It was tender and fierce at once, full of longing and the bitter knowledge that it could never be. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. They broke apart, breathing hard. "I should go," Eden said, though she made no move to leave. "Storm's coming," Colt observed. "Be dangerous on the roads." They both knew it was an excuse, but neither cared. As the storm broke in earnest, turning the world outside into a chaos of wind and water, they found shelter in each other's arms. In the hayloft, with the rain drumming on the roof, they came together with a passion born of denial and desperation. Each touch was a confession, each kiss a promise they couldn't keep. Eden's fingers traced the scars on his body, the bullet graze on his shoulder, the knife wound on his ribs, learning the map of his hard life. "So much pain," she murmured against his skin. "Not now," he said, pulling her closer. "Not with you." They made love as the storm raged, finding in each other a tenderness neither had known before. Afterward, they lay entwined in the hay, listening to the rain and trying not to think about tomorrow. "Tell me about the painter," Colt said quietly. Eden stiffened slightly. "How did you—" "Small town. People talk." She was quiet for a long moment. "His name was James. He came to town to paint the missions. Stayed at the boarding house. He was kind, gentle. He saw beauty everywhere, even in me." "What happened?" "We walked together, talked about art, books, dreams. Nothing improper, but it didn't matter. When my father found out, he said I'd shamed our family. The next week, I was engaged to Matthew." Her voice turned bitter. "James left town the day my engagement was announced. I never saw him again. Colt pulled her closer, understanding her prison better now. I'm sorry. I used to be sorry too. Now I'm just angry. She turned in his arms, fierce determination in her eyes. I won't live like this forever. Colt, I can't. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe it's time I stopped being afraid. Maybe it's time we both did. But morning came too soon, and with it, reality. Eden left before dawn, slipping through the gray light like a ghost. Colt watched her go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that they'd crossed a line that would change everything. At the ranch, things grew worse. Tools went missing, only to turn up in Colt's area. Whispers followed him everywhere. Hayes made sure everyone knew about Eden's late-night visit, though he couldn't prove where she'd gone. A week after the storm. Colt returned from mending fences to find Sheriff Waverly waiting at the ranch with 2 deputies. Colt Rollins, Waverly said, his voice carrying across the yard. I need you to come with me. On what charge? Suspicion of theft. We found a running iron hidden in the barn, right where you sleep. Colt's blood ran cold. A running iron used to alter brands was damning evidence. He knew it had been planted, but proving it would be another matter. That's not mine, he said evenly. We'll let Judge Carver decide that. Waverly's smile was thin and cold. Unless you'd prefer to move along voluntarily, leave town today, and we can forget this unpleasantness. The threat was clear. Leave Eden behind, or face trumped-up charges that could end in a noose. Colt looked around at the gathered ranch hands, saw the satisfaction in Hayes's face, the discomfort in others who knew this wasn't right but wouldn't speak up. I'll need to collect my things, Colt said finally. Make it quick. As he packed his few belongings, rage burned in his chest. Not at the false accusation, he'd faced those before, but at the timing, just when he'd found something worth fighting for. It was being ripped away. He was loading his horse when Samuel appeared with a cloth-wrapped bundle. Food for the road? The old cook said gruffly. And a word of advice, sometimes the best way to fight is to retreat and regroup. This ain't over, son. Not by a long shot. As Colt rode out of Hollow Creek, he looked back once at the barn where everything had changed. Somewhere in town, Eden was trapped in her cold house with a man who used the law like a weapon. The thought of leaving her behind burned worse than his healing ribs. But Samuel was right. This wasn't over. Colt had spent 8 years running from his past. Maybe it was time to stop running and start fighting for his future. A future that, against all odds and reason, had green eyes and smelled of lavender. The sun was setting as he made camp in a box canyon 5 miles from town. He'd stay close. Watch. Wait. Sheriff Waverly had won this round, but the game was far from finished. As coyotes began their nightly chorus and stars emerged in the darkening sky, Colt touched the spot on his chest where Eden had laid her hand. The memory of their night together burned bright as any star, a beacon in the darkness that promised he'd find his way back to her, no matter what it cost. The days following Colt's departure brought a change in Sheriff Waverly that chilled Eden to her bones. He watched her constantly, his pale eyes tracking her movements like a hawk studying prey. Conversations at dinner became interrogations disguised as small talk. You've been quiet lately, he observed one evening, cutting his steak with mechanical precision. Still troubled by the attack in the canyon? Among other things. Eden kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. The town's been talking. He didn't look up from his plate. About the Henderson barn dance, about who you danced with. I danced with several people. One in particular, from what I hear. His knife scraped against the china. That drifter, Rollins. He saved my life. I thought one dance was appropriate gratitude. Matthew's hand slammed on the table, making the dishes jump. Appropriate? My wife, dancing with saddle trash in front of the whole county. Do you have any idea how that looks? Eden met his glare steadily, like a woman thanking a man who risked his life for her. Is that all it was? He leaned forward, his voice dropping dangerously. Because Tom Hayes tells a different story. Says that drifter couldn't keep his eyes off you. Says you two looked mighty familiar for strangers. Tom Hayes is a drunk and a gossip. Maybe, but even drunks can see what's in front of them. Matthew stood, moving behind her chair. His hands settled on her shoulders, fingers digging in just shy of painful. I've been patient with you, Eden, more patient than most men would be with a wife who gives them no children, no warmth, but my patience has limits. That night, Eden lay rigid beside him, staring at the ceiling and planning. She'd been a fool to think she could continue this charade indefinitely. The walls were closing in, and she needed to act before they crushed her entirely. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Maria approached her while Matthew was at his office, pressing a folded paper into her hand. "From my cousin at Hollow Creek," she whispered. "He said to give this to you. Very important." Eden unfolded the note in the privacy of her room. The handwriting was rough but legible. "Mrs. Waverly, the man you're thinking of is camped at Red Rock Canyon, 5 miles north. He won't leave without word from you. Be careful. The sheriff has men watching. S." Her heart hammered as she burned the note in the fireplace. Colt hadn't abandoned her. He was waiting, risking capture to stay close. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. 3 days passed before opportunity arose. Matthew announced he'd be riding to the county seat for a trial, gone overnight. Eden waited until his dust had settled, then told Maria she needed to visit her father at the parsonage. Instead, she rode north. Red Rock Canyon was a gash in the earth, hidden from the main trail by a stand of cottonwoods. She found Colt's camp by following a thin stream of smoke, her heart pounding with each hoofbeat. He emerged from the shadows like a ghost, rifle in hand until he recognized her. Then the weapon dropped, and she was in his arms, breathing him in, leather and smoke and safety. "You shouldn't have come," he said against her hair, even as he held her tighter. "You shouldn't have stayed," she countered. They pulled apart to look at each other. The bruises had faded to yellow-green, but she could see the toll of sleeping rough in the lines around his eyes. "I couldn't leave," he said simply. "Not with things as they were. They're worse now. Matthew knows something. He's having me watched." Colt's expression darkened. "Has he hurt you?" Not physically, but it's coming. I can feel it building in him like a storm." He cupped her face in his hands. "Then we leave. Tonight. I've got money saved. Enough to get us to California. We can start fresh where no one knows us. He'll follow. You know he will. His pride won't let him suffer the humiliation of a runaway wife. Then we'll keep running. I've been doing it for 8 years. I can do it forever if you're with me." Eden closed her eyes, letting herself imagine it. A small house somewhere green, where the desert couldn't reach. Waking up in Colt's arms without fear. Children with his dark eyes and gentle hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll come with you." They made plans quickly. Eden would return home, pack only essentials. Tomorrow night, when Matthew was at his weekly poker game, she'd slip away. They'd meet at the old mission ruins and be in the next county before anyone noticed she was gone. But as Eden turned to leave, they heard horses approaching. Colt pushed her behind a boulder, rifle ready. 2 riders appeared, deputies from town, scanning the canyon walls. "Anything?" one called to the other. "Nothing, but Waverly said to check every hideout within 10 miles. That drifter's got to be somewhere." They moved on, but the message was clear. The noose was tightening. "Go," Colt urged, "before they circle back." Eden kissed him fiercely. "Tomorrow night, no matter what. No matter what." He agreed. The ride back to town felt endless. Eden's mind raced with preparations. Lies she'd need to tell. Items she couldn't leave behind. So focused was she on the future that she didn't notice the rider following at a distance until too late. Matthew was waiting when she reached home, sitting in the parlor with a glass of whiskey and a smile that made her blood freeze. "Good visit with your father?" he asked mildly. "Yes, he's well. Funny thing, I stopped by the parsonage on my way out of town. Wanted to remind him about the church board meeting. He said he hadn't seen you in a week." Eden's mind went blank. There was no lie that could save her now. Matthew stood slowly, deliberately. "Where were you, Eden?" "Writing. I needed to think." "Think about what? How to disgrace me further? How to run off with your saddle-tramp lover?" "I don't know what you—" His backhand caught her across the cheek, sending her stumbling against the wall. It was the first time he'd struck her, and they both knew it had broken something irreparable. "Deputy Morrison followed you," he said calmly, as if he hadn't just crossed that line. "Not all the way. You lost him in the canyons. But I think we both know where you went." Eden tasted blood where her teeth had cut her lip. "It doesn't matter what you think you know. I'm leaving you. Matthew, tonight, tomorrow, soon. You can't stop me. Can I?" He grabbed her arm, yanking her close. "You're my wife, in the eyes of God and law. You belong to me, and I'll see you dead before I let you make a fool of me with that murdering trash. He's 10 times the man you are." Eden spat, past caring about consequences. Matthew's face went white with rage. He dragged her up the stairs, shoving her into their bedroom and locking the door from the outside. "You'll stay there until you remember your place," he called through the door. "And if that drifter shows his face in my town again, I'll hang him myself. Badge or no badge." Eden pounded on the door until her fists were raw, screamed until her voice gave out. When Maria tried to bring her food, Matthew sent her away. As night fell, Eden sank to the floor, despair washing over her. Outside, a dust storm began to build on the horizon, turning the sunset the color of old blood. Somewhere in the canyons, Colt was waiting for a woman who wouldn't come, and locked in her prison of propriety and law. Eden finally understood the true price of the life she'd been forced into. But despair, she would learn, could be transformed into determination, and a woman with nothing left to lose was capable of anything. The storm hit just after midnight, rattling windows and doors like something trying to get in. Or perhaps, Eden thought as she studied the lock on her door by lamplight, like something trying to get out. She'd spent years being the dutiful daughter, the respectable wife, but that woman had died the moment Colt Rollins pulled her from a tilting carriage. What remained was someone harder, fiercer, someone willing to fight for the life she wanted. The storm raged on, and Eden began to plan. Matthew thought he'd caged her, but he'd only given her time to shed her last illusions. When she finally walked out of this house, and it would be as a different woman entirely. One who knew that sometimes the only way to claim your freedom was to take it, the morning after the storm. Matthew unlocked Eden's door with the air of a man granting clemency to a prisoner. His face showed no remorse for the bruise blooming on her cheek, only cold satisfaction at her apparent submission. "I trust you've had time to reconsider your behavior," he said, straightening his vest. Eden kept her eyes downcast, playing the broken woman he expected to see. "Yes, Matthew. Good. You'll join me for breakfast, and then we'll visit your father. It's time he knew what kind of daughter he raised." At the parsonage, Reverend Josiah Hart took one look at his daughter's bruised face and went still. But when Eden hoped for outrage, for protection, she found only disappointment. "Marriage requires sacrifice, Eden," her father said, his hands clasped as if in prayer. "You made vows before God. Whatever difficulties you face, abandoning those vows is not the answer." "He struck me," Eden said quietly. "And what did you do to provoke such correction?" When she didn't answer, he sighed. "I've heard the rumors. Daughter, dancing with drifters, riding alone to God knows where. You've brought shame upon yourself and your husband." Eden looked between the two men, her father in his black coat and white collar, her husband in his sheriff's star, and saw them for what they truly were. Not protectors, but jailers. Not moral guardians, but hypocrites who used scripture and law to justify their cruelty. "I understand, Father," she said, her voice steady as stone. That afternoon, Matthew issued a formal warrant for Colt Rollins's arrest on charges of horse theft and suspicion of murder. The wanted posters went up within hours. Colt's rough likeness staring from every corner. $500 reward, Matthew announced at the town meeting that evening. "Dead or alive, though I'd prefer alive, justice should be seen to be done." Eden sat in the front pew of the church, her hands folded, her bruise hidden beneath powder. She felt the town's eyes on her, some sympathetic, most judgmental. The sheriff's wife who'd strayed, now properly corrected. But behind her calm facade, rage burned like wildfire. That night, while Matthew made his rounds, Eden found Maria in the kitchen garden. "I need your help," she said without preamble. Maria glanced nervously at the house. "Senora, the sheriff said I'm not to—" "I'll pay you a month's wages. Cash." Eden pulled bills from her pocket, saved from household expenses over years. "And you can leave town after, if you want. Start fresh somewhere." Maria's eyes widened at the money. "What do you need?" "Tomorrow's market day. You'll go early. Take the wagon. I'll be hidden in the back, under the blankets. Once we're out of town, I'll slip away. Tell anyone who asks that I'm ill, resting in bed. The sheriff will— By the time he realizes I'm gone, I'll be beyond his reach." Eden pressed the money into Maria's hands. "Please, I can't stay here anymore." Maria looked at the bruise on Eden's cheek, then nodded slowly. "My cousin says the man you seek moves his camp each night, but there's a pattern. Tomorrow night, he'll be at Willow Springs, 10 miles northwest." Eden squeezed her hands gratefully. "Thank you. Vaya con Dios, senora. Be careful." The next morning dawned clear and hot. Eden feigned illness, staying in bed while Matthew dressed for work. He checked on her once, his hand cool on her forehead. "Rest," he commanded. "I want you well for Sunday services. The whole town needs to see us together, united." After he left, Eden moved quickly. She dressed in her plainest clothes, pinned up her hair, and packed a small bag with essentials. Money, her mother's jewelry, a change of clothes, the photograph from her wedding day that she planned to burn at the first opportunity. Maria arrived with the wagon as planned. Eden slipped out the back door and burrowed under the blankets among sacks of flour and corn. The wagon lurched into motion, every bump in the road a small victory carrying her away from prison. They were almost to the edge of town when the wagon stopped suddenly. Eden's heart hammered as she heard voices. "Morning, Maria. Early start today?" "Deputy Morrison." Eden held her breath. "Si, senor. The senora wants fresh vegetables for dinner. Very particular. How is Mrs. Waverly? Heard she was feeling poorly." "Sleeping. The sheriff says no visitors." A pause. Eden could feel Morrison's suspicion through the wagon boards. "Mind if I check your load? Been having trouble with thieves hiding in wagons." Eden's hand found the derringer in her pocket, a wedding gift from Matthew that he'd taught her to use. The irony wasn't lost on her, but Maria laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Of course, Deputy. Though I warn you, the flour sacks are very dusty. Bad for your nice uniform." Morrison grumbled but must have decided it wasn't worth the trouble. "Get on then, and tell the sheriff I'll have that report ready by noon." The wagon rolled on. Eden didn't breathe properly until they were well past the town limits. At a crossroads 5 miles out, Maria stopped. "This is as far as I dare go. Senora, the springs are that way. Through the mesa." Eden climbed out, stiff and covered in flour dust. She hugged Maria quickly. "Take the wagon back slowly. Give me as much time as you can. The sheriff is not a forgiving man. When he finds out, you'll be long gone by then. Use the money. Start over somewhere better." Maria smiled sadly. "We all deserve somewhere better, senora, especially you." Eden struck out across the desert, the sun climbing higher with each step. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, red rocks and golden sand, scattered cacti standing like sentinels. She'd lived here 3 years but had never really seen it, trapped as she was behind lace curtains and propriety. By afternoon, her water was running low and her feet were blistered in her unsuitable boots. But Willow Springs appeared like a miracle, a cluster of green around a small pool, shaded by the namesake trees. "Colt," she called softly. He emerged from the trees instantly, as if he'd been watching for her. His face transformed from wariness to joy to concern as he took in her appearance, dusty, disheveled, with her bruise now purple-green in the harsh light. "Eden, my God, what did he—" She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her fear and relief and love into the contact. When they broke apart, she was crying. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I tried to come that night, but he knew. He locked me in, and I thought I'd never—" "Shh." He held her close, stroking her hair. "You're here now. That's all that matters." "There's a warrant," she said against his chest. $500. Every bounty hunter in the territory will be looking for you. Then we leave tonight. Mexico's only 50 miles. We can disappear across the border, start fresh where Waverly's badge means nothing. Eden pulled back to look at him. "No more running. Not from him. Eden. I've been thinking. In my room. Locked away like an animal. I realize something. Matthew won't stop. His pride won't let him. If we run, he'll follow. To Mexico, to California, to the ends of the earth. We'll always be looking over our shoulders." Colt's jaw tightened. "Then what do you suggest?" "We fight back, but not with guns. With truth." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "This is a signed statement I wrote last night. About Matthew's connections to the horse thieves. About how he's been taking bribes to look the other way. About the money hidden in our house from those bribes." Colt studied her face. "You have proof?" "I've been his wife for 3 years. I know where he keeps his secrets." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Did you really think a sheriff's salary paid for that big house? The imported furniture? He's as corrupt as any outlaw. Just better at hiding it. Even if that's true, who'll believe you? You're a runaway wife with a bruised face and a known association with a wanted man. Judge Patterson in Tucson will believe it. He's been investigating corruption in local law enforcement, and I have names, dates, amounts. Enough to bury Matthew and half his deputies." Colt was quiet for a long moment, processing this new side of the woman he loved. "You've thought this through. I've had nothing but time to think." She touched his face gently. "I won't be a victim anymore, Colt, and I won't let them make you one either." As the sun began to sink, they made camp properly. Colt had supplies, cached, food, water, ammunition. They sat by a small fire, planning their next move like generals preparing for war. "We'll need to move fast," Colt said. "Once Waverly realizes you're gone and where you've gone, he'll come with everything he has." "Let him come." Eden's eyes reflected the firelight. "I'm done being afraid." That night, under a canopy of stars, they made love with a different kind of passion than before. Not desperate or stolen, but deliberate, a claiming of each other and the future they were fighting for. "Whatever happens," Eden whispered in the darkness, "I regret nothing." "Nor I," Colt replied, holding her close. "You gave me something to stop running for. That's worth any price." As dawn approached, they prepared to move. The journey to Tucson would be dangerous, with Waverly's men surely on their trail by now. But Eden felt no fear, only fierce determination. She'd spent 3 years dying slowly in a respectable prison. Now, finally, she was ready to live, even if it meant risking everything. The sun rose over Willow Springs, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. And somewhere behind them, Eden knew. Matthew Waverly was waking to find his caged bird had flown. The hunt would begin soon, but for the first time in her life, Eden Waverly was ready to be the hunter instead of the prey. The Mercantile Bank of Mercy's Bend stood on Main Street like a fortress of respectability, its brick facade and iron bars promising security to the town's citizens. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, that promise was shattered by the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire. 3 masked men burst through the doors, revolvers drawn. "Nobody move! This is a robbery!" The tallest of the 3, his voice muffled by a bandana, herded customers against the wall while his companions emptied the teller's drawers. It was over in minutes. Professional, efficient, brutal. As they fled, one of the robbers took a bullet from the bank guard's rifle. He stumbled, clutching his shoulder. but his partners hauled him onto his horse. They disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving chaos in their wake. By evening, the town was in uproar. Sheriff Waverly stood before the gathered crowd, his face grave with purpose. $2,000 stolen, he announced. Guard Thompson is fighting for his life. This lawlessness ends now. Deputy Morrison stepped forward. Sheriff, we found something. He held up a blood-stained bandana, fallen from the wounded robber. More importantly, he produced a distinctive knife bone handled, with CR carved in the grip. Eden, watching from the crowd, felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized that knife. Colt had carried it for years, a gift from his father. But how? Colt Rollins, Waverly declared, holding the knife high. Already wanted for horse theft, now revealed as a bank robber and possibly a killer. I'm raising the bounty to $1,000. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Eden wanted to scream that it was impossible. She and Colt had been traveling toward Tucson, miles from town when the robbery occurred. But revealing that would mean revealing everything. Back at the house, Eden confronted Matthew in his study. That knife was planted. You know Colt wasn't anywhere near that bank. Matthew looked up from cleaning his pistol, his expression coldly amused. Do I? The evidence suggests otherwise. What evidence? A knife that anyone could have placed there? Careful, Eden. His voice carried warning. You're already on dangerous ground. Your little adventure yesterday didn't go unnoticed. Maria confessed everything before she left town. Eden's heart sank, but she kept her chin high. So, you know I was with Colt. You know he couldn't have robbed that bank. I know you're an adulteress who abandoned her husband for a criminal. Matthew stood, moving closer. But I'm willing to forgive. Come back to your duties, submit to your place, and I'll ensure your lover gets a trial instead of a bullet. You're lying. Maybe, but can you risk it? He touched her bruised cheek with mock tenderness. Think carefully. Eden, your next choice determines whether Rollins hangs legally or dies in the desert like a dog. That night, Eden made her choice. She waited until Matthew was asleep, then crept to his study. The safe behind the portrait of his father held more than money. It held the proof she needed. Letters from Jack Thornton, leader of the region's most notorious gang, payment records, plans for future robberies where the sheriff would ensure his deputies were conveniently elsewhere. She took everything, along with the cash Matthew had skimmed from previous crimes. As she prepared to leave, a floorboard creaked behind her. Going somewhere, Matthew stood in the doorway, still in his nightshirt but holding his Colt .45. I'm leaving, Eden said simply, and I'm taking the evidence of what you really are. Evidence? You mean the desperate lies of a fallen woman trying to save her outlaw lover? I mean the truth that Judge Patterson will be very interested to hear. Matthew's face contorted with rage. You stupid little... He raised the gun. The derringer in Eden's hand fired first. The small gun Matthew had given her as a wedding gift, taught her to use for protection, now protected her from him. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him against the doorframe. His gun clattered across the floor. Eden kicked it away, keeping her derringer trained on him as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. You shot me, he gasped, disbelief mixing with pain. You actually shot me. You gave me no choice. Eden gathered the documents with her free hand. Just like you gave Colt no choice when you framed him. He's a dead man, Matthew snarled. Even if you reach Tucson, every bounty hunter in the territory is looking for him. Someone will collect that $1,000. We'll see. She left him there, bleeding and cursing, and took his horse from the stable. The ride through the darkness was treacherous, but fear drove her forward. She had to reach Colt before the hunters did. She found him at their agreed meeting place, an abandoned mine shaft 10 miles from town. His relief at seeing her turned to alarm when he saw the blood on her dress. It's not mine, she said quickly, sliding from the saddle into his arms. Matthew found me taking the evidence. I shot him. Colt held her at arm's length, searching her face. Is he alive? Wounded? She pulled out the documents. But we have what we need. Proof of his corruption. His connection to the gang, including evidence that Jack Thornton's men robbed that bank. Not you. How do you know it was Thornton? Because I found the plans in Matthew's safe. He was supposed to get 20%. Her laugh was bitter. He was setting you up to take the fall from the beginning. A sound in the distance made them both freeze horses, moving fast. Posse or bounty hunters? Colt said grimly. Either way, we need to move. They rode hard through the night, pushing their horses to the limit. At dawn, they stopped at a small creek to rest and water the animals. That's when they saw the riders on the ridge. 5 men, watching. Bounty hunters, Colt confirmed, checking his rifle. They'll wait until we're in the open, away from cover. How far to Tucson? 20 miles, too far with them on our tail. Eden made a quick decision. Then we split up. I'll take the documents to Judge Patterson. You draw them off. Absolutely not. Colt, listen. They want you, not me. I'm just the sheriff's runaway wife. Without me slowing you down, you can lose them in the canyons. And if I can't, she kissed him fiercely, then I'll make sure your name is cleared. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Before he could protest further, she was mounting her horse. The old mission at San Pedro. Meet me there in 2 days. Eden, I love you, she called, spurring her horse toward Tucson. Behind her, she heard Colt fire a warning shot at the bounty hunters, then the thunder of hooves as he led them away in the opposite direction. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look back. The ride to Tucson was a blur of dust and determination. Eden pushed her exhausted horse mercilessly, knowing that every minute counted. When the city finally appeared, she nearly wept with relief. Judge Patterson's residence was a modest adobe house near the courthouse. Eden pounded on the door until a servant answered, then pushed past despite protests. She found the judge in his study, a dignified man with silver mutton chops and keen eyes. He looked up in surprise as she burst in, dusty and wild-eyed. Judge Patterson, I'm Eden Waverly. I have evidence of corruption in Mercy's Bend. Sheriff Matthew Waverly has been taking bribes from outlaws, framing innocent men, and— Slow down, Mrs. Waverly. The judge gestured to a chair. Start from the beginning. For the next hour, Eden laid out everything. The documents, the frame job on Colt, Matthew's connections to Jack Thornton's gang. Patterson examined each piece of evidence carefully, his expression growing darker. This is very serious, he said finally. If even half of this is true, it's all true, and there's an innocent man being hunted right now because of my husband's lies. Patterson stood, reaching for his hat. I'll dispatch federal marshals immediately, both to arrest Sheriff Waverly and to call off the hunt for Mr. Rollins. Thank you. Eden sagged with relief. Don't thank me yet. Your husband has friends in high places. This won't be easy. He studied her bruised face with compassion. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? I need to get to the San Pedro mission. Colt, Mr. Rollins, will meet me there. I'll provide an escort, federal marshals who can ensure your safety. Patterson's expression was kind but firm. You've been very brave, Mrs. Waverly. But bravery without backup is just another word for foolishness. As Eden left Tucson with her federal escort, she allowed herself a moment of hope. The truth was out. Help was coming. All she needed now was for Colt to survive long enough for justice to catch up. The mission ruins appeared at sunset, ancient adobe walls glowing gold in the dying light. Eden searched the shadows anxiously, her heart jumping at every sound. Then she saw him, emerging from the ruins like a ghost, dusty, exhausted, but alive. She ran to him, not caring about propriety or the watching marshals. He caught her, holding her tight as she sobbed against his chest. The hunters, she asked. Lost them in Devil's Canyon? What about— It's done. Judge Patterson has everything. Federal marshals are heading to Mercy's Bend right now. For the first time since that night in the hayloft, Colt smiled. Really smiled. So it's over? Almost. Eden pulled back to look at him. There's still a trial. Questions to answer, but Matthew's finished. His badge can't protect him anymore. As night fell over the mission, they sat together watching the stars emerge. The federal marshals kept a respectful distance. Understanding these two had earned their moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be a trial, scandal, the difficult process of rebuilding lives torn apart by corruption and lies. But tonight, Eden Waverly sat in the arms of the man she loved, finally free of the chains that had bound her. The desert wind whispered through the ruins, carrying away the last traces of her old life. In its place, something new was beginning, something worth every risk they'd taken to claim it. The Mercy's Bend courthouse had never seen such a crowd. People packed the gallery, spilled into the hallways, and gathered outside in the dusty street. The trial of Sheriff Matthew Waverly had become the most sensational event in the territory's history. Eden sat in the witness section, her back straight despite the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. Beside her, Colt wore his only good shirt, his face clean-shaven but bearing the shadows of their ordeal. Federal Marshal James Brennan stood guard, having personally escorted them back to town. At the defendant's table, Matthew Waverly sat rigid in civilian clothes, his sheriff's star conspicuously absent. His shoulder was still bandaged from Eden's bullet, and his pale eyes burned with cold fury whenever they found her in the crowd. Judge Patterson, having recused himself due to his involvement in the investigation, had been replaced by Circuit Judge Elias Thornberry, a stern man with a reputation for harsh but fair justice. "The court will come to order," Judge Thornberry commanded, his gavel silencing the crowd. "We are here to determine the guilt or innocence of Matthew Waverly on charges of corruption, conspiracy, theft, and abuse of office." How does the defendant plead? Not guilty. Matthew's lawyer, a slick man from Tucson named Pemberton, declared, "My client has been the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by his vindictive wife and her criminal paramour." Prosecutor William Nash, sent by the federal government, stood slowly. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Matthew Waverly used his position as sheriff to enable and profit from criminal activities while framing innocent men for crimes they didn't commit." The first witness was Eden. As she took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. She could feel the town's judgment, some sympathetic, many hostile. The sheriff's wife who'd betrayed her husband, who'd chosen a drifter over respectability. "Mrs. Waverly," Nash began gently, "please tell the court about your marriage to the defendant." Eden's voice was steady as she described the arranged marriage, the cold years, the growing realization of Matthew's corruption. When she reached the night he struck her, several women in the gallery gasped. "And what prompted you to search your husband's safe?" Nash asked. "I knew Colt, Mr. Rollins, was innocent of the bank robbery. The timing was impossible. I suspected Matthew was involved somehow, and I was right." She produced the documents, explaining each one. Letters from gang leader Jack Thornton, records of bribes, plans for robberies where sheriff's deputies would be conveniently absent. Pemberton's cross-examination was vicious. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Waverly, that you were conducting an illicit affair with Colt Rollins?" Eden lifted her chin. "I fell in love with Mr. Rollins, yes, while married to another man, while trapped in a marriage to a corrupt, violent man who used his badge to line his pockets." "So you admit to adultery?" "I admit to choosing love over a mockery of marriage." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Thornberry banged his gavel for order. "And this supposed evidence," Pemberton continued. "How do we know you didn't forge it to save your lover?" "Because," Eden said clearly, "I'm not the only one who knew about Matthew's activities." The next witness proved her point. Maria, brought back under federal protection, testified about late-night visitors, mysterious payments, and Matthew's violent temper. "He would meet with men in his study," Maria said, her accent thick with nervousness. "Always after midnight. I recognized some from wanted posters." Then came Samuel, the cook from Hollow Creek, who testified about the planted evidence used to frame Colt. That knife supposedly found at the bank, I saw it in Hayes's possession 2 days before the robbery. He was showing it off, saying someone would pay good money for it. The prosecution's star witness, however, was unexpected. Jake Morrison, Matthew's own deputy, took the stand with obvious reluctance. "Deputy Morrison," Nash said, "you've been granted immunity in exchange for your testimony. Please tell the court what you know." Morrison, sweating profusely, described years of looking the other way on Matthew's orders, prisoners who disappeared with their valuables, evidence that went missing, warnings given to certain outlaws before raids. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Nash asked. "You don't cross Matthew Waverly," Morrison said simply. "Not if you value your life." The courtroom erupted when Jack Thornton himself was brought in, shackled and under heavy guard, captured by federal marshals using Eden's information. He'd made a deal to testify. "Yeah, Waverly was on my payroll," Thornton said with a shrug. 20% of every job in exchange for protection. The bank robbery was my boy's, just like the lady said. Waverly suggested pinning it on that Rollins fellow. Why would he do that? Thornton's smile was ugly. Man was stepping out with the sheriff's wife. Waverly wanted him gone. Permanent like. 2 birds, 1 stone. Colt testified last, his deep voice filling the courtroom as he recounted finding Eden in the canyon, their growing connection, and Matthew's campaign to destroy him. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he admitted. "But I never stole horses, never robbed that bank. Sheriff Waverly needed someone to blame, and I was convenient." Pemberton tried to paint him as a violent drifter, but Colt remained calm under fire. When asked about killing a man 8 years ago, he met the lawyer's eyes steadily. "I killed a man who was attacking my 14-year-old sister. I'd do it again. That doesn't make me a thief or a bank robber." Matthew took the stand in his own defense, maintaining his innocence with cold conviction. He painted himself as a dedicated lawman betrayed by a faithless wife and jealous subordinates. "My wife shot me," he said, touching his bandaged shoulder. "Then she ransacked my safe and fled with her lover. Now she concocts these lies to justify her actions." But under Nash's relentless questioning, cracks appeared. Matthew couldn't explain the money found hidden in his house, far exceeding his salary. He claimed the letters were forgeries, but couldn't say why gang members would forge evidence against themselves. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they filed back in, Eden gripped Colt's hand tightly. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit robbery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of corruption and accepting bribes, guilty. On the charge of abuse of office, guilty. On the charge of falsifying evidence, guilty." The litany continued. Matthew's face grew paler with each verdict, his mask of righteousness finally cracking. Judge Thornberry's sentence was harsh, 20 years in territorial prison. As the marshals led Matthew away, he turned to stare at Eden with such venom that Colt stepped protectively in front of her. "This isn't over," Matthew called out. "You hear me, Eden? This isn't over." But it was. The crowd dispersed slowly, the town buzzing with shock and gossip. Eden and Colt found themselves standing outside the courthouse in the afternoon sun, suddenly unsure what came next. "You're free," Eden said wonderingly. "We're both free." Reverend Hart approached them, his face aged by shame. "Eden, I was wrong. Can you forgive a foolish old man?" Eden studied her father for a long moment. "I can forgive, Father, but I won't forget. And I won't be the daughter you tried to force me to be." He nodded sadly and walked away. Other townspeople approached, some to apologize, some to condemn, many simply to stare at the woman who'd brought down the sheriff. That evening, in the small hotel room they'd rented, Eden and Colt finally had a moment alone. She curled against him on the narrow bed, exhausted but exhilarated. "What now?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" "Wherever you want," Colt replied, stroking her hair. "California, Oregon, maybe Colorado. Somewhere we can start fresh." "What about Mercy's Bend?" He pulled back to look at her. "You want to stay, after everything?" "No, but—" She struggled to find words. I feel like we're running away again, letting them win. Sometimes leaving is winning. Aiden, we don't owe this town anything." She was quiet for a moment. "You're right, but first, I want to do something." The next morning, Eden stood before Judge Thornberry one last time. "I want a divorce," she stated simply, "on grounds of abuse, corruption, and breach of marital contract." The judge nodded. "Given the circumstances and Mr. Waverly's conviction, I'll expedite the proceedings. You'll be free within the week." As they left the courthouse, Marshal Brennan approached them. "Rollins." A word? Eden tensed, but Brennan's expression was friendly. "I've been authorized to offer you a position. Deputy U.S. Marshal. We could use men like you, men who stand up for what's right even when it costs them." Colt looked stunned. I need to think about it." "Take your time. The offer stands." That night, as they watched the sunset from the hotel balcony, Eden asked, "Are you considering it? The marshal position? Maybe it would mean we could stop running. Build something real." He looked at her. "What do you think?" "I think," Eden said slowly, "that you've spent 8 years paying for defending your sister. Maybe it's time to let that define you in a good way." A week later, Eden signed her divorce papers with a steady hand. Matthew was already gone, transferred to prison in Yuma. The big house on Maple Street stood empty, a monument to respectability built on lies. She kept nothing from her marriage except her mother's jewelry and the hard-won knowledge of her own strength. Everything else could rot. At the stage depot, Marshal Brennan saw them off. Colt had accepted the position but requested assignment in Denver, far from the memories of Mercy's Bend. "You'll make a fine marshal," Brennan said, shaking Colt's hand. "And Miss Hart, you've got more courage than most men I know." Eden smiled. She'd taken back her maiden name, though she wouldn't carry it long. As soon as they reached Denver, she and Colt would marry properly, not in a cold ceremony arranged by others, but in a union chosen freely by two people who'd fought for their right to love. The stagecoach pulled out of Mercy's Bend in a cloud of dust. Eden didn't look back. Beside her, Colt took her hand, and she felt the circle of warm metal he'd slipped onto her finger that morning, a simple band bought with honest money, worth more than all of Matthew's diamonds. Ahead lay Denver, the mountains, a new life. Behind lay pain, prison, and the ruins of a respectable lie. Eden Waverly was dead, buried with her sham of a marriage. In her place sat Eden Hart, soon to be Eden Rollins, a woman who'd shot a sheriff, exposed a conspiracy, and chosen love over safety. As the desert gave way to grassland and the mountains appeared on the horizon, she leaned against Colt's shoulder and smiled. They'd both been running for so long, him from his past, her from her future. Now, finally, they could stop running and start living. The homestead sat on a rise overlooking endless grassland. 20 miles from the nearest town, it wasn't much, a 2-room cabin with a lean-to kitchen, a small barn, and a corral for horses. But to Eden, it was paradise. She stood on the porch, one hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, the other resting on her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant, and she still marveled at the life growing inside her. After years of barrenness in her marriage to Matthew, she'd feared she couldn't have children. This baby felt like a miracle, a blessing on the new life she and Colt had built. "Easy there, Belle." Colt's voice carried from the corral where he was working with a young mare. "That's it, nice and steady." Eden smiled, watching her husband work. 2 years had changed him. The haunted look had faded from his eyes, replaced by quiet contentment. His deputy marshal's badge caught the light as he moved, a symbol of the respectability he'd never thought to claim. They'd married in Denver 3 days after arriving, in a tiny church with wildflowers in her hair and his promises spoken in a voice rough with emotion. Then they'd found this piece of land, bought with their combined savings and a loan from the Cattlemen's Association, close enough to town for Colt to fulfill his marshal duties, far enough for the peace they both craved. The first year had been hard, building the cabin, breaking ground for a garden, learning to live with ghosts that sometimes woke them in the night. Eden would dream of locked doors and Matthew's cold eyes. Colt would startle awake, reaching for a gun, sure that bounty hunters had found them. But slowly, the new life took root. Neighbors accepted them, drawn by Colt's quiet strength and Eden's determination. When rustlers hit nearby ranches, Marshal Rollins tracked them with the same relentless focus he'd once used to survive. When Sarah Hendricks needed help birthing a difficult baby while Doc Morrison was away, Eden's steady hands and calm voice saw them through. "Riders coming," Colt called, squinting at the horizon. Eden tensed automatically, old fears stirring even now. Unexpected visitors made her heart race, but Colt's relaxed posture told her there was no danger. 2 riders approached, a man and woman, travel-worn but riding good horses. As they drew closer, Eden gasped. "Sarah!" Colt had already vaulted the corral fence, moving toward the riders with disbelief written on his face. "Sarah, is that you?" The woman dismounted and flew into his arms. "Hello, brother." Eden watched the reunion with tears in her eyes. Colt had written to his sister after the trial, finally able to give her a permanent address, but they'd never expected her to make the long journey from California. Sarah pulled back, studying her brother's face. "You look good. Colt, happy." "I am." He turned, holding out his hand to Eden. "Sarah, this is Eden. Eden, my sister." Sarah embraced Eden carefully, mindful of her condition. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving him back to us." The man with Sarah was her husband, Thomas Wright, a quiet schoolteacher with kind eyes. Over supper, they caught up on 8 years of separation. Sarah's children, 3 boys who looked like their uncle, were staying with Thomas's parents in Sacramento. "We're moving to Colorado Springs," Sarah explained. "Thomas has been offered a position at the new academy there. When I got your letter saying you were in Colorado," she squeezed Colt's hand, "I couldn't pass up the chance to be near family again." That night, Eden found Colt sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. She settled beside him, taking his hand. "You're quiet," she observed. "Just thinking. For 8 years, I believed I'd ruined Sarah's life, that killing that man had destroyed her chances for happiness." He shook his head. "But she's happy, married, children, a good life. You saved her. Colt, everything good in her life exists because you protected her." He pulled Eden close, his hand moving to rest on her belly. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. You, the baby, Sarah here, this place." He gestured at the land around them. "I keep waiting to wake up." "It's real," Eden assured him. "We made it real." A week later, with Sarah and Thomas settling into their new home in Colorado Springs, life returned to its rhythm. Eden tended her garden, coaxed vegetables from the stubborn soil, and prepared for the baby. Colt split his time between marshal duties and ranch work, slowly building their small herd of cattle. One evening, as Eden worked on tiny baby clothes by lamplight, a strange pain gripped her. She gasped, dropping her sewing. "Eden?" Colt looked up from cleaning his rifle. "What is it? I think—" Another pain, stronger. "The baby. It's too early, but I think the baby's coming." Fear flashed across Colt's face before he controlled it. "I'll ride for Doc Morrison." "No time." Eden gripped his hand as another contraction hit. "Send word to Sarah. She'll know what to do." The next hours blurred together, pain and fear and Colt's steady presence. Sarah arrived like a guardian angel, taking charge with the same calm competence that had seen her through 3 births of her own. "Too early," Eden gasped between contractions. 2 months too early. "Babies come when they're ready," Sarah soothed. "This one's just eager to meet its parents." As dawn broke over the grassland, a tiny cry filled the cabin. Eden sobbed with relief as Sarah placed the baby, so small, so perfect, on her chest. "A daughter," Sarah announced, tears streaming down her face. Small but fierce, just like her mother. Colt stared at the tiny bundle with wonder and terror. "She's so small. Is she—" "She's strong," Doc Morrison confirmed. "Having arrived just after the birth, keep her warm, Feed her often. These early ones. They're fighters if you give them a chance. They named her Hope Sarah Rollins. She was indeed a fighter, gaining weight steadily, her cries growing stronger each day. Eden barely left her side those first weeks, terrified that if she looked away, this miracle might vanish. One night, as Eden nursed the baby by the window, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A rider on the ridge, silhouetted against the moon. Watching. "Colt," she called softly. He was beside her instantly, following her gaze. The rider remained motionless for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. "Probably just a drifter," Colt said, but she heard the tension in his voice. The next morning, they found a letter tucked under a rock by the gate. Eden's hands shook as she recognized the handwriting. "My dearest wife," it began. "Did you think stone walls could hold me? Did you think I would forget what you cost me? I've been watching. Pretty little family you have. Shame if something happened to it. Soon, Eden, very soon. Your loving husband, Matthew." Colt read it once, then burned it. He's bluffing, trying to scare us, but they both knew better. Matthew Waverly had escaped during a prison transfer, killing 2 guards in the process. The news had reached them a month ago, but they'd hoped he would run for Mexico, not risk coming after them. "We need to leave," Eden said, clutching Hope tighter. "Take the baby and run." "No." Colt's voice was firm. "No more running. This is our home, our daughter's home." He strapped on his gun belt. "I'm done letting that man dictate our lives." He rode to town, returning with 2 other marshals and a plan. They would wait, watch, and when Matthew showed himself, they'd be ready. 3 nights later, he came. Eden woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was ablaze, flames licking at the sky. She grabbed Hope as Colt burst from the cabin, rifle in hand. Matthew stood in the yard, lit by the fire's glow. Prison had changed him, gaunt now, with madness dancing in his pale eyes. "Hello, Eden," he called. "Come to collect what's mine. She's not yours anymore. Waverly." Colt stepped forward. "You've got no claim here." "I've got every claim." Matthew's composure cracked. "She's my wife, mine, and I'll see her dead before I let her shame me further." The hidden marshals emerged from their positions, guns drawn. "Matthew Waverly, you're under arrest for escape and murder. Drop your weapon." Matthew laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think I care about arrest, about living?" He raised his gun, not at the marshals, but toward the cabin where Eden stood with Hope. "If I can't have her—" Colt's rifle spoke first, then the marshals. Matthew spun and fell, his shot going wild into the night sky. Eden didn't go to him as he lay dying. She stood in the doorway, holding their daughter, watching the man who'd been her jailer bleed out in the dust of the home she'd built without him. "Eden," Matthew gasped, reaching toward her. She stepped back into the cabin and closed the door. By morning, it was over. The barn was rebuilt by neighbors who came without being asked, the way of frontier communities. Matthew was buried in an unmarked grave. His madness and obsession finally ended. Life resumed its rhythm. Hope grew stronger, her first smile breaking across her face like sunrise. Sarah visited often, her boys teaching their tiny cousin the names of horses and birds. The ranch prospered, Colt's reputation as both marshal and rancher growing with each passing season. On Hope's first birthday, they held a gathering. Friends and neighbors filled the yard, children racing between the tables while adults shared food and laughter. Eden stood with Colt, watching their daughter take her first wobbling steps between Sarah's outstretched arms and theirs. "No regrets?" Colt asked softly, echoing her words from that night in Willow Springs. Eden looked around at the life they'd built, the solid cabin, the thriving garden, the friends who'd become family, the daughter who carried both their strength and their hope for the future. "None," she said, meaning it completely. "Not one." As the sun set over the grassland, painting the world in gold and crimson, Eden knew that every choice, every risk, every moment of fear had led them here, to this place of peace and purpose, where love had triumphed over law, where two broken people had built something whole. The little cabin on the rise stood strong against the vast Colorado sky, smoke rising from its chimney like a prayer of gratitude. Inside, a family gathered around the table, Colt saying grace in his deep voice, Sarah helping Hope with her spoon, Thomas discussing books with Eden. They were no longer running, no longer fighting, no longer afraid. They were simply, beautifully, home. And in the endless grassland stretching toward tomorrow, the wind whispered stories of redemption, of courage, of love that refused to be caged. It spoke of a woman who chose freedom over safety, a man who chose standing still over running, and a child who would grow up knowing that sometimes the greatest act of faith is believing you deserve happiness. The West had tested them with its harsh beauty and unforgiving justice, but they had endured, and more than endured. They had flourished. In the growing darkness, the first stars appeared, bright and constant as hope itself. And in the little cabin beneath that vast sky, a family settled in for the night, safe in the knowledge that they had written their own ending to the story, an ending that was really just the beginning. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed Eden and Colt's journey, please let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. What did you think of Eden's courage and Colt's redemption? We can't wait to hear from you.